Okay, hi everybody. We're just waiting for Ilze, and she'll be joining in a second. Ilze, won't you send me a comment if you're battling on your side? I am getting your request to join. I've also sent you an invite. Hi, everybody. Okay, there we are.
There we go.
Ilse, you there? Oh, yay. And we are right on time.
I'm here, Lee.
Awesome.
Thank you for
Thank you,
joining
everybody.
me.
Good evening. Thank you so
Good
much for
evening.
joining us. Okay, so it is 2 minutes to. I'm just going to hang on for a quick second. In the meantime, if I can ask you, if you do have any questions, please do send them through, while we are chatting, but hopefully we do cover. We have got quite a few things that we are wanting to chat about, and Ilze, of course, suitably equipped to do so. Our subject
Thank you,
expert
Lee.
this evening. Okay, we've got a minute left. And we're going to dive straight in. Thank you for joining. To everybody who has joined, good evening. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hope everyone has sorted their dinners. And I'm sitting in front of a heater. It is freezing in
I've got my
Gqeberha.
decaf. I've got my decaf coffee. Warm
Sitting
up
in front
from
of the
the
heater.
inside.
Got my water. Okay. Right, so we're going to go ahead and start. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It is 7 o'clock. The topic is sex positive families, a parent's guide to talking to your children about sex and sexuality. A very daunting topic. Any parent or guardian will tell you. We obviously were raised, in a time where talking about sex was very awkward and often taboo. And our
I
kids are
agree.
growing up at a time where they are often overly exposed thanks to technology. And we are having to get with the program, and we're having to do things very differently at a rapid rate. We're having to catch up. So Ilze Biggs is, of course, a conscious parenting coach. She's a counseling psychologist based here in Gqeberha, and she's our subject expert this evening, and she is going to be broaching the topic and guiding us through these very treacherous waters. So Ilze, thank you so much for chatting to us this evening and for
Thank you,
helping
Lee.
us. Okay, so initially, what I want to chat or find out from you is, what exactly is sex positivity? When we say sex positive families, what are we talking about?
So initially, I would also just like everybody to take a moment and just also reflect on, the messages you received around sex and sexuality growing up. Who was the person? How did you discover these topics? Who told you about it? Who were the first people that you communicated around this? And I do think, in my opinion, sex negative culture is our silence around sex. And our silence gives children the idea that this topic is that this topic is taboo. And we do see an absolute epidemic around, sexual abuse of children. And children never speak out about these topics exactly because of our silence around that. So for me, sex positivity is really an open and safe environment where children feel comfortable to and feel trusting that they can ask those questions.
Do you know what is Ilse, if I may interrupt, you've touched on something that is so important and so delicate and sensitive, and that is the sexual abuse, particularly of children, where it is something that's not spoken about. And oftentimes, where even the parent has some kind of perception that something is going on, but they cannot bring themselves to address
To
it.
talk about it. And
Yeah.
children are not going to speak to us about what's going on in their lives if we are silent about those topics. And think about it for yourself. Who did you go to? Who did you ask? When anything happened or you came across anything, who did you speak to? Or did we also learn to keep quiet, to hide, to keep secrets? Where did we feel safe to go and discuss these really important things going on in our life? So the idea of sex positivity is that there is a safe environment where children can openly ask questions, explore topics without the fear of being shamed, being judged, feeling like they're going to be in trouble, without feeling fear. And how do we create those environments in our families? If our children anticipate that they're going to get into trouble, or that we're going to moralize, we're going to preach, we're going to lecture, we're going to use fear-mongering strategies, if you ever do that or ever, then you'll be grounded for life. How are we creating a safe environment for our children where they feel like they actually can come and talk to us? And whether it's about sex or any other topic.
An important point is to also say, where they feel safe, but also an informed environment. Because I think a lot of the time, many of us perhaps think back and, we were chatting to friends. We felt comfortable talking to our friends about sex, and we all kind of just figured it out. And it was a case of the blind leading the blind, because our friends knew about as much as we did. And
it's misinformation and inaccurate information and inaccurate information.
Exactly. If you are not talking about it and you being quiet about it, it doesn't mean that the conversations are not happening. But they're happening in a misinformed fashion, and you then as a parent are not able to guide and support the process.
Yes. And ideally, we want our children to come to us, to come to a trusted adult who can guide. And I just want to give parents also a little bit of permission. It's absolutely okay if you do not have all the answers.
Yeah.
Your child may come and ask you a really, uncomfortable question, and it's okay to say to them, thanks for this great question. Is it okay if I get back to you about it later?
Yeah.
It's a very important topic.
I'm not sure. Let me find out. I'll come back.
Yes, let's be honest with them. Let's be honest and say, sure, I really don't know how to answer this right now. I think I should do some research and then I'll get back to you.
So, Ilze, that being said then, the importance of talking. When is the right time? I know people are wanting to know this. A couple of people DM this question. When is the right time to then start having conversations with your kids?
Really, if I say to parents, we can start from birth already, and from the age of 0 to 3, what are the conversations that we have with our kids? So the important topics will be around, say, body awareness. So when you are, changing your child's diaper, just as I say, this is your nose, this is your ear. Now I'm wiping your penis, or now I'm wiping your vulva. If we start using those words that maybe carry shame for us, we feel a lot of shame even naming genitals by the correct name.
To be honest, it sounds weird hearing you even say that.
There you go. And we adults, how many females here know that it's actually vulva and not vagina? So already at that age, we're starting to help children, identify the different body parts. So there's body awareness. We start the 0 to 3. We can start with that. Children who do know the correct names for their genitals already creates more safety for them. One of the first deterrents for any sexual predator is if a child knows the correct names of their genitals, because this is a child who's growing up in a family where they talk.
Yes.
So already and then for a child who has maybe been exposed to some form of, maybe even if your child is sick, or they've got a medical concern, that they can actually describe how they're feeling it in their body. If so many children have so many different nicknames, how is anybody going to determine, really maybe where they're hurting or where something is sore?
Ilze, I grew up in a culture where, and I'm thinking, if any child were to talk about a penis or a vulva or to describe whatever, there's been a culture of saying, yes, ogat, ukazile. That child is
But see,
right.
there's the
They are
shaming.
right.
There's the shaming already.
Yeah.
So now already the child feels like they're bad, they're in trouble, they've done something wrong. So again, how we respond to that. And so I mean, again, that would be, say, 0 to 3, even 0 to 3, when you start speaking around consent, and safety, we can already start modeling boundaries, to our children. So I mean, before the child can communicate to the world, we can already perhaps say something like, please ask before you touch my child. Consent is important to our family. So we are modeling consent and boundaries from 0 to 3. So maybe around sex and relationships, we just really reflect around those ages. What are our values around that? What are the messages we want to, teach our children? What are our values around sex and relationships? Because there we're talking also about respect, boundaries. In countries where they do have comprehensive sex education, and especially the Netherlands, we have found that, and that starts from the age of 4, that we see young people will abstain from having sex. They will wait actually until they are older. And they also report much more pleasurable, first sexual experiences. We obviously, again, there's much less teenage pregnancies, also sexually transmitted diseases. So there is a lot of benefits to us starting these conversations early.
So you mentioned values. I'm thinking myths. What are some of the myths that you see that parents have then about talking to kids about sex? Because if you mention the Netherlands and you're saying you see a much lesser rate, for instance, of
early onset sexual experiences. Yes.
What would the myths be? Because as far as I understand, the fear is that if you talk about it, you're sending them directly to it. Yeah.
That is the first myth, that the fear is, if I talk to my children about it, that's going to make them curious. That's going to mean that they want to go and do it. I mean, from the age of 4 to 8, and especially from the age of 8, children are incredibly curious about their bodies. I mean, again, maybe back in, my day, if children went and played doctor, what were children doing when they were playing doctor? Maybe we were, again, are we pulling pants down? Are we kicking out each other's genitals? And this is happening at, say, 4, 5. So children are naturally very curious around that. But again, if they have accurate information, if they understand around consent and touching and what the body parts are called and what is appropriate touching and inappropriate touching, we will not have the need to go and explore it in that way through experimentation. So that is very much a myth, is that if we talk to children about it, it will increase the likelihood of them becoming sexually active. It's actually the opposite. So that's completely false. Some of the other myths is that, children don't want to talk to their parents about sex. Actually, children do. They do want to be able to come to us for guidance. we are awkward. We are awkward around that,
Yeah.
and maybe again a reflection of the context we grew up in. And so perhaps it also requires that we go and kind of untangle and deconstruct a lot of those messages we grew up with. But children really would prefer to be, and we want to be their guides. We do not want the internet to be their guide. We do not want them to go to an older teen, or an older teen, or, an older sibling to be their guide. Again, we even start having conversations around media literacy. We can start these conversations really early too. If it is, saying to your child that, you may at times see certain images, certain pop-ups can come on your screen. Maybe you see some naked people or people touching each other, and I want you to really not click on anything like that, because that is not for children. That is something for adults, and that you can come and call a trusted adult, and you can talk about what it is that you have seen. So making children aware of what they could possibly be exposed to helps them to critically think about the content, that could just come when they have access to screens.
There are so many things that you are touching on at once that I'm like wanting to grab onto. So the first, the first is around our own comfort as the parents with our own sexuality, right? Because if we've been raised during more conservative times, in homes where there were sex negative families, and our parents, haven't been talking to us about sex and so on, our whole perception about sex is obviously a more conservative one. How then do we get to a point where we are imparting information about sex with our children when we ourselves are not comfortable with sex or with our sexuality? How do we then get to that point?
Well, again, whatever your history is, and people who maybe have their own sexual trauma histories, I would honestly just recommend that you really do go and find a space, because it can be very triggering if you haven't maybe worked through your own trauma. So I've got a lot of compassion for that, and again, very understandable. But then also there's amazing resources available these days that maybe also wasn't available, when we grew up. So there are phenomenal books out there, fantastic sites out there, that you can really, find some very valuable information, and it can be that guide for you.
You certainly don't advise outsourcing. I remember when I first started my period, my mom was nervous to talk to me about it, about menstruation. Yes. And it was outsourced to an aunt. My aunt spoke to me about my period. Is it something that you would recommend, outsourcing, contacting a conscious parenting coach or a counseling psychologist?
I would definitely help the parent. I will help the parent to feel more empowered to have those conversations. Because when we're talking about sex and sexuality, it's not a one-time conversation. This is an evolution of conversations. The conversations you're going to have 0 to 3 is going to be different to the conversations 4 to 8, different to the conversations 8 to 12, different to the conversations when they are, facing puberty. So this isn't like that one with the birds and the bees talk. We have one conversation and that's it. Yeah. We're going to continue having the conversation, because again, we're talking about body awareness. We're talking about consent. We're talking about sex and relationships. We're talking about media. And then also we'll be talking about gender orientation, and sexuality. So we're going to have an evolution. And these conversations will even continue then when our children are young adults.
Yeah. So it really does apply, to everyone who is joining us this evening. It applies to all age groups. As Ilze says, right from 0 to 3, 4 to 8, into puberty, and then it continues,
It continues.
So, whilst on the topic of puberty, there's been a spate of young kids, obviously, on their phones or on WhatsApp groups or conversations at the back of a bus or during a free period in class, exposure to pornographic material. We've seen a spate of this happening, particularly with the teenage group. What would you say? How do we as parents handle the situation if our kids have been exposed to pornographic material or content, or they've been involved? How do we handle it? Because I can tell you how my dad would have handled it.
Yes, definitely, Lee. And so again, I'm going to say, like, you really want to sit with yourself and notice whatever is coming up. Contain yourself, ground yourself, because if you in any way are going to shame or judge, or punish, if you are going to be highly reactive, immediately we are creating an unsafe environment for our children to explore these topics. I'll say, coming from a place of non-judgment, coming from a place of curiosity, and then a space of education. How did you feel when you were exposed to that? What did that bring up for you? Is it something that you were curious about looking at, or did you kind of feel pressured to look at it because everybody else was? And then also having conversations with our children around, that is not a reflection of real, healthy sexual relationships. And although maybe some of those images we are curious about, but what do we mean by a healthy sexual relationship where we show respect for each other? That they also have to understand that this is acting, that this is not real people, real relationships, and this is not actually what happens when you are in an intimate relationship. Because I think that is where it becomes very distorted, is that, young people...
Because those people are acting.
They are acting. It's actors. They are being paid to do this. It is absolutely a performance. But for young people, they can get the message that is how they should be. And then they often are maybe, again, allowing things that they feel very uncomfortable with, but because the people on the screen do it that way, I have to do it that way.
Yeah.
And I think, again, helping them be mindful that, watching that and using that for, if it's self-stimulation and I mean, even just that, the conversations around masturbation and the messages we give boys and the messages we give girls, even those conversations we start, from a young age, that it is okay for you to spend time with your body and discover your body and to touch yourself. But again, we're doing that in private, and that is your private time, and that it isn't, again, what were the messages we got? I think it was like, for girls, it's like, don't touch there, it's dirty.
Yes.
And then somehow now we have to have healthy sexual relationships when we reach adulthood. So think again, it's how we arrive in that moment. Are we in connection with our child? Curiosity around it, reflecting with them about that, and then also guiding them and giving them more accurate information. And if anything, that we also discourage them from using that as a way to pleasure themselves or in a relationship, and that the imagination is way more creative. Because this can become something, I mean, again, over time, it can become a very addictive pattern, and it can then be very, very hard for young people to actually experience a pleasurable sexual relationship because of that visual, stimulation. And
Ilze,
and then
I want
again,
to touch on the point about healthy relationships and what sex looks like or intimacy looks like in healthy relationships.
yes.
How does parents who are affectionate with one another in front of their kid impact the kid? Is it a good thing? Is it not necessarily a good thing? Is it fine for you within boundaries, of course. I'm talking about a kiss, a touch, being affectionate. Is that healthy for your kids to see that?
I definitely would agree that it is. I mean, again, young kids maybe kind of feel like, oh, this is gross, but we can bring playfulness and we can bring
Yeah,
humor into it, because it is one way that we also are expressing love, and we also then modeling that,
yeah,
to our kids. Maybe also just again our own curiosity that once our children become teenagers, and especially for teenage girls, do dads feel uncomfortable showing affection, when their daughters are starting to develop?
yeah,
And that may be something, also to explore,
yeah,
because I think often that is something that can happen as young girls are developing, that dads maybe don't feel like they can hug the same way or have their
yeah,
daughter on their
yeah.
lap. And,
Well, I
but
mean, the
again,
bathroom door starts getting shut now when you go for showers, and so
and it's interesting that kids actually start showing that within themselves, from a certain age, where they don't want you to come into the bathroom
no,
anymore.
no.
And it was so natural and organic. But yes, I mean, I think it's conversations about relationships. So it's conversations about consent and about safety, and and it's not just about. I mean, again, I think for our daughters to be comfortable that they can say no,
Yeah.
and for boys to also learn that no doesn't mean I keep trying until they say yes. But it's not just about the no, that we can also be kind of attuned to someone's body language, that we can also pick up that they are uncomfortable, within their
A
personal
small thing,
space.
that I've learned as a parent, if I may share with everybody,
Yes.
around consent and boundaries. It's a small thing, but it's made the world of difference. Is I learned to stop forcing Ella to kiss a family member hello.
Yes.
So from
Yes.
when she was small, if she didn't want to, I certainly got flack for it. Like, go
Oh,
and kiss
definitely.
Auntie so and so, go and
We
kiss
had to
Uncle
go
so
and
and so
kiss.
hello. You had
Yes.
to,
Yes.
and
Even
so
though you
I
felt
stopped
didn't
that.
want to. Even though we didn't want to. So what are we
Yes,
really teaching? Do not
exactly,
trust your own
exactly.
body. Do not listen to your own intuition. Do something that you don't want to do for the sake of someone else.
So, if I can just say to everybody, first of all, thank you so much for joining. Really hoping that this is proving to be very insightful and meaningful and informative for you. If you do at this point have any questions, please do send them through via the comment section. We've got 6 minutes left. We're ending at 7:30. We're keeping it nice and short and snappy.
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean, there's just so much to talk about. In the meantime, if anybody does have any questions and are sending those through, my question, Ilze, I think one of my final questions, my second last question, is now on the flip side. So we were talking about being overly exposed or advanced and so on. On the flip side, is it a bad thing if your child doesn't show any awareness around sex or sexuality? Is it something that one should be concerned about and kind of try and encourage? Or is it okay if they are not showing awareness at that point?
I would definitely say, I mean, again, no judgment. I think every child is going to develop in their own way. However, let's not wait for them to show an interest in kind of sex or curiosity around their bodies before we start having those conversations. We can still start having those conversations, even if they maybe aren't aware of their own sexuality. But I mean, sex is everywhere, and we can use any opportunity to talk about it, whether it's something that came up in a movie or something that was, something that came up in the news. There are always these kind of, moments, teachable moments that do come up.
So,
Regularly, there are
two
teachable moments that come up.
two questions that have come through from some parents online, both of them actually around the same thing. They're wanting to know where they can find tips and resources around body awareness for children 0 to 4, that very young age group that you were talking about. you mentioned something important, Ilze, that it's important to use the correct names for
Or
body
genital.
parts, for
Yes.
genital areas, and so on. We grew up at a time where there were little nicknames and euphemisms used, and so on. You're now saying it's very important to use the correct names for genitals. Some parents wanting to know, where can they get further resources? Where can they
Yes.
get further tips from you on that body awareness?
There is a really great website called sexpositivefamilies.com. You will find amazing resources there. And I think there's also maybe even links, to other sites. There's also a site called, it's pornconversation.org, which also gives you a guide, different age groups and the conversations you will have. I mean, again, even those conversations, if we can start them before puberty, often people say if we haven't started by 8, we're already too late because they would have been exposed to something.
Somehow.
Even by the age of 8. I have a
So
book.
those resources, while you're looking, let me just repeat in case you may have missed them. It's sexpositivefamilies.com
sexpositivefamilies.com
and pornconversations.com.
conversations.org. And I think on those sites .org, and they are I think also from there this is a lovely little book. Die groot boek van seks in my lyfie. I don't know if you can see that. I'm not sure if there was I'm not sure if there's an English one, or I got this years ago. And I mean, again, when my children were little, it was really just even talking about the pictures. I think like when I was pregnant with my daughter, my son was about 3, and he asked me, well, how did the baby get there? And it was really just like, well, the dad has a seed and the mommy has an egg, and when the seed and the egg come together, the baby forms in the mom's uterus. And then later we're like, but how did that seed get to the egg? So now that was at about the age of 5. Now we're having a completely different conversation around that. Now it's evolving. Like he was very satisfied with that answer at 3.5, and I remember also just again showing my kids this book. Initially we're showing pictures and we just look, and it's the changing body and what happens to a girl's body when she gets older and what happens to a boy's body and the changes that we can anticipate. And like I say again, it was an evolution, and it's still ongoing conversations. So this one is great. And then also just one other book that I think is absolutely great. But this is a book, Let's Talk About Body Boundaries, Consent and Respect.
Oh.
This one is also
actually one that you had sent me around
boundaries and consent.
But you had sent me the
PDF. Yes, I scanned it.
Fantastic.
So that's that one.
I'm going to try and see if I can share it somehow with anybody. You can DM me. I'll try and see if I can share that PDF with you to those parents who did ask for the 0 to 2. But I think that body consent one applies even to older kids.
Yes, definitely. And there was also a book, and I know I've got the copy of it somewhere. It was Where Willie Went. And it's this little story of the sperm, and really for young children. I thought that was such a nice initial, almost little story to read, So I must say, again, phenomenal resources out there, but definitely check out Sex Positive Families. And like I say, again, it's going to be an evolution of conversation. So over time, we also are going to get more comfortable, and yes, I mean, listen, I have been floored with questions that I was asked, and then I would be like, okay, I'm gonna think about this one, and I'm gonna come back to you. And I thought, geez, I'm so prepared with this, and I know all this stuff, and I have been like, okay, I wasn't prepared for this conversation, And I mean, this was when, I think my son was about 11 when he asked me that. And I think the most important thing, if you do discover that your child has watched some porn or that they looked at anything, they have to get the message from you that they are not in trouble. They are not in trouble. but we are going to further explore it, and let's look at the boundaries around it, and, let's just engage with it, and let's give them accurate information. And so I think that pornconversations.org, there's even some lovely little videos there in 8 to 11, 12 to 15, and 16 and up, the conversations that we can have.
So there's also been a question around when we are going to have a follow-up to this conversation. It looks like we're definitely going to have to, because we haven't even touched on sexual orientation and gender orientation, which is a whole conversation on its own. So we're going to have a follow-up. Ilze and I will both look at our diaries and we'll schedule something. What I do want to end off by saying, though, is that my take-home is that not talking about it doesn't make sex disappear. It is important, to create an environment where sex is comfortably approached and talked about at home, because that is the only way you're going to be able to guide and support the conversation. Because you're not talking about it doesn't mean it's not going to happen during the free period, at school, at the back of the bus, via WhatsApp, at lunch break,
on the playground.
On the playground, and then you risk your child being misinformed. So let us, find out through resources. Ilze is a fantastic resource, and I'm going to end off by saying, please do give her a follow on Instagram or Facebook.
Thank you.
Her handle is there. It's at Bigs Ilze, ILZE. Give her a follow. DM should you have any questions. Make the appointments. Empower yourself as a parent. And we are also going to share this video. It is recorded. Ayanda, I see your request. Ayanda is concerned that she may have missed something here or there. It is recorded. We are going to be sharing the living daylights out of it, Ilze and I. So look out for it. You can also keep this video as a resource. And look out for upcoming conversations. Ilze and I have spoken before about self-love. And she is a conscious parenting coach. She is a counseling psychologist based in Gqeberha, and she is just super. So Ilze, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lee. Thanks for your questions, and that we can engage with this conversation. I think it is so important. And again, I just want to normalize to all parents, it's okay if you feel uncomfortable. It's okay if you don't know where to start, but you will feel so much more empowered when you kind of address that within yourself and create that space for your kids to come to you. You are their best teacher. Yeah. Let's not have the internet be their teacher, and let not their friends be their teachers. You are their greatest teacher.
It is so important for us to break those generational wounds and habits.
Yes.
And, let's break them. Let's change the narrative. Let's bring our kids closer. Let's open up and talk about things. It really does help to create a better bond. That's what I've found.
I think personally. A great connection.
It creates a much better connection. There isn't this kind of ostracized, isolated, kind of sense. There is a better connection. It feels healthier. So let's get talking.
Fantastic. Have a beautiful evening.
Thank you. Have a great evening. Thanks for joining, everybody. We'll chat soon.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.